If you start the right crops in late summer, your garden doesn't necessarily have to stop producing before Christmas. In areas with relatively mild winters, some vegetables planted or transplanted in August and September can still be harvested fresh from the garden in December, and sometimes well into January. But the timing is not the same everywhere in the United States. A gardener in Georgia may still be transplanting certain crops in late August, while someone in Minnesota may have needed to start that same crop several weeks earlier. So for every plant on this list, we'll look at more than just cold tolerance. We'll also look at when to start it, whether seeds or transplants make more sense, and what determines whether it can realistically still be in the garden around Christmas. Number 10. Parsley. Parsley is usually treated as an herb you step outside to grab a few sprigs of when you're cooking, but it has one advantage that becomes especially useful late in the year. Parsley handles cold weather much better than many warm-season herbs. If you already have strong young plants established by late summer, parsley can continue producing leaves as temperatures cool. In regions with relatively mild winters, harvesting can continue surprisingly far into the season. Parsley prefers plenty of sun, although in mild winter conditions, it can still grow with some partial shade. The soil should drain well, but shouldn't be allowed to dry out completely. When harvesting, cut the outer stems close to the base instead of simply picking leaves from the top. Leave the center of the plant intact so it can continue producing new growth. One thing to remember is that parsley can be slow to germinate. If your goal is a late-season harvest, starting with healthy transplants may be much more practical than waiting for seeds to germinate late in the year. In areas with long periods of hard freezing, parsley may need a row cover, cold frame, or another protected location. But in a mild winter climate, a well-established parsley plant can still be giving you fresh leaves long after basil and other summer herbs are gone. Number 9. Arugula. Arugula is one of the most useful crops if you're getting a slightly late start. Unlike vegetables that need months to form a large head or root, arugula grows quickly in cool weather. That makes late August or September a very useful planting period in regions with mild winters. You can sow the seeds directly. You also don't need a large area. A short row or narrow strip of soil can produce plenty of young leaves. You can begin harvesting while the leaves are still small and continue picking over time instead of removing the entire plant at once. Arugula tends to bolt quickly in hot weather, so late summer doesn't always mean you should sow it immediately. If your area is still extremely hot, waiting until temperatures begin to fall may give you much better results. Once cold weather arrives, growth slows considerably. The goal is to let the plants reach a useful harvest size before the days become very short, then keep them in the garden and harvest as needed. In colder regions, a row cover or cold frame can extend the season significantly. And in mild winter climates, arugula can be one of the easiest ways to have fresh leaves available around Christmas. Number 8. Mustard greens. Mustard greens are another good choice for gardeners starting later because many varieties grow fairly quickly. They prefer cooler weather, and the leaves usually have a much stronger, pepperier flavor than many other greens. You can harvest small leaves while they're young, or allow the plants to grow larger and remove the mature outer leaves as needed. If you're starting in late summer, pay attention to the actual temperatures where you live. In places where August is still extremely hot, young seedlings may struggle if you plant too early. Waiting until the worst heat begins to ease can make establishment much easier. Another advantage of mustard greens is that you don't have to wait until the entire plant reaches its final size before you harvest anything. Once the plant has enough leaves, you can begin taking a few at a time. That gives mustard greens more flexibility than crops where almost all the harvest depends on one large head or root forming successfully. Mustard greens tolerate cold fairly well, although exact cold tolerance varies by variety. If hard freezes are common where you live, have some protection ready before temperatures drop sharply. For a December harvest, mustard greens are worth considering because they combine relatively fast growth with good performance in cool weather. Number 7. Kohlrabi. Kohlrabi looks very different from most other cool season crops. The round part we harvest isn't actually a root buried underground. It's a swollen section of stem that develops just above the soil surface, forming a green or purple globe depending on the variety. Kohlrabi prefers cool conditions. If most of its development happens during very hot weather, quality can suffer compared with plants that mature as temperatures become cooler. For a crop aimed at late fall or early winter, planting time matters. In many mild winter regions, late July through August can work well. In colder climates, you may need to start earlier. Give the plants enough space. Crowding them doesn't create more usable kohlrabi. It usually just prevents the swollen stems from developing properly. Harvest when the stem reaches the recommended size for the variety, before it becomes oversized, tough, and woody. The younger leaves are edible too, although you shouldn't remove too many while the plant is still developing its main stem. Some kohlrabi varieties tolerate cold quite well. In areas with relatively mild winters, the plants can remain in the garden into December and sometimes beyond. Number 6. Winter cabbage. Cabbage requires more planning than the leafy greens we've covered so far. If you want a properly sized head by late in the year, transplants usually make much more sense than starting seeds too late. In mild winter areas of the South, late August or early September may still be an appropriate time to transplant certain cabbage varieties. But in many northern regions, gardeners need to start considerably earlier. That's why it's important not to copy a planting date from someone in another part of the country without checking your own local conditions. Give cabbage enough room when planting. A mature plant needs substantial space, and squeezing plants together won't magically create more full-sized heads. Cabbage grows best with good sunlight, fertile soil, and fairly consistent moisture. And even during a fall crop, caterpillars and other leaf-feeding pests can still be a problem while the plants are young, so keep checking the leaves. Varieties selected for fall and winter production can tolerate cold surprisingly well. In the right climate, mature heads can remain outside and be harvested in December or even later. But this is one crop where the variety and transplanting date matter a lot. If you start too late, you may end up with a perfectly healthy cabbage plant that simply doesn't have enough time to form a full head before winter growth slows dramatically. Number 5. Collard greens. Collard greens work especially well for a long harvest because you don't have to wait for the entire plant to finish growing. The plant develops a central stem surrounded by large leaves. Once those leaves reach a usable size, you can remove the outer leaves and leave the growing center intact. That's a major advantage for winter harvesting. Instead of waiting for one single harvest date, you can leave the plant in the garden and take leaves as you need them. Collards are cool season plants with good cold tolerance. In many mild winter regions of the United States, they can remain outdoors throughout December, and a light frost doesn't necessarily end the harvest. If you plant in late summer, transplants can save valuable time, although direct seeding may still work in regions with a long enough fall season. Give the plants plenty of sunlight and reasonably fertile soil. Water is especially important while they're building a lot of leaf growth in late summer and fall. Once temperatures drop, watering needs usually decrease, but don't assume the plants never need water just because the weather is cold. If you want a large leafy green that you can harvest a little at a time through late fall and into winter, collards are one of the most practical choices. Number 4. Kale. Kale is well known for handling cold weather, and that's exactly why it belongs on this list. It can be started during summer and allowed to mature as temperatures gradually cool. Once you have a healthy plant with plenty of leaves, you can harvest the mature outer leaves for weeks while leaving the growing point intact. Some varieties handle cold better than others. Curly types and varieties bred for colder climates can remain usable after light freezes that would finish many summer vegetables. But that doesn't mean kale will continue growing at its fall season speed in the middle of December. As the days become shorter and temperatures drop, growth slows dramatically. So the goal is to get the plant close to a good harvest size before winter really settles in. In very cold climates, mulch around the base and row cover can extend the harvest. In milder winter areas, much less protection may be necessary. Harvest from the bottom upward, taking the mature leaves and leaving the center of the plant alone. Kale may not be the most unusual crop on this list, but it earns its place for one simple reason. When started at the right time, you really can walk into the garden in December and still have usable leaves to harvest. Number 3. Spinach. Spinach is one of the best crops for a late summer planting that carries into cold weather. It prefers cool soil and cool air far more than most summer vegetables, so August or September can be an excellent time to sow it, depending on where you live. Sow the seeds directly where you want the plants to grow. If the weather is still hot, keeping the seedbed consistently moist during germination is especially important. Very hot, dry soil can make spinach germination much less reliable. Once the plants are established, you can harvest individual young leaves or let them form larger rosettes and take the mature outer leaves. Spinach has excellent cold tolerance. In mild winter regions, harvesting can continue through December and January. In colder climates, a row cover or cold frame can make a major difference. The important thing is not to sow too early if your August still feels like the middle of summer. Spinach does not like heat. If temperatures are still very high, waiting until late August or early September may actually give you better results. Once temperatures begin to fall, spinach can establish during autumn and continue providing leaves well into colder weather. Number 2. Brussels sprouts. There aren't many vegetables that look more appropriate for a Christmas harvest than a tall stalk covered in Brussels sprouts. But this is also the crop on the list that requires the most careful planning. Brussels sprouts grow slowly. In regions with short summers and early winters, including much of the upper Midwest, mid-August is already far too late to start them from seed for a winter harvest. In those areas, gardeners usually need to start much earlier. But in parts of the South with mild winters, strong transplants may still go into the garden in late August or early September and continue developing throughout the fall. So don't buy Brussels sprout seeds in mid-August and assume you can automatically harvest them at Christmas. Check the days to maturity for the specific variety and look up the recommended transplanting dates for your region. If the appropriate planting time has already passed where you live, don't force a late planting just to aim for Christmas. Make a note of the variety and start earlier next year. As the plant grows, small sprouts form along the main stem. They usually mature from the bottom upward, so you can harvest them gradually instead of cutting the whole plant at once. Brussels sprouts tolerate cold very well. In the right climate, mature stalks can remain outdoors through late December and beyond. They're an excellent crop for a Christmas harvest, but only if you start early enough for your particular climate. Number 1. Mâche or corn salad. If you want a green that seems almost designed for cold weather, mâche is one of the most interesting choices. It forms small, tender rosettes that stay low to the ground. It doesn't need a trellis, it doesn't need to form a large head, and it doesn't spend months developing a big root. And one of the most useful things about mâche is that you don't necessarily need to sow it very early. In mild winter areas of the Pacific Northwest, mâche can be sown around September and harvested from late fall through winter. That makes it particularly useful for anyone watching this in mid-August. You may still have time to prepare the planting area rather than realizing you've already missed the right time to start. Mâche prefers cool conditions. Its seeds don't germinate as well in hot soil, so waiting until temperatures fall is often part of the plan rather than a delay. Once the plants reach a usable size, you can cut the whole rosette near the base or harvest leaves depending on how you want to use them. The flavor is mild, and mâche is commonly eaten fresh in salads. It has very good cold tolerance, but like every crop in this video, cold tolerance doesn't mean it will keep growing rapidly in frozen soil and very short winter days. In extremely cold regions, a cold frame or row cover may still be necessary. But if you garden in an area with a mild winter and want something you can sow in late summer or early fall and still harvest fresh around Christmas, mâche is one of the strongest options on this list. If your goal is to harvest fresh vegetables in December or early January, there are 3 things to check before planting anything on this list. First, know your average first frost date and how cold winter actually gets where you live. Georgia, Western Oregon, and Minnesota cannot use the same planting calendar. Second, check the days to maturity for the exact variety you're growing. Faster crops like arugula, mustard greens, and spinach give you much more flexibility than Brussels sprouts or winter cabbage. And third, remember that plants grow much more slowly as the days shorten late in the year. For a Christmas harvest, the goal is usually to get most of the plant's growth finished during fall, then use its cold tolerance and protection when necessary to keep that harvest available outside for longer. If you've ever harvested vegetables straight from your garden in December or January, please share your experience in the comments. Tell us what you grew, what part of the country you're gardening in, and how well the crop handled your winter conditions. Your experience could help another gardener in a similar climate decide what's actually worth trying, and I'd genuinely like to read what has worked in your garden and learn from it too. Subscribe for more practical food gardening ideas built around real weather, real backyards, and the growing conditions you actually have. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next garden.